Hey, folks, good evening, and thanks for joining me on Phantoms and Monsters Radio. I welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat, and as well as all the regular crew we have come in here every week. Um, now, hundreds of years ago, sailors worldwide told of a sea monster called the Kraken that could toss ships into the air with its many long arms. But today, science states that aquatic monsters don't exist. Now, there's still underwater Leviathans in the natural world, like whales and giant squid. Now, scientists estimate that 91% of the ocean species have yet to be classified, and that more than 80% of our ocean is unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. But we constantly received anecdotal accounts of cryptid creatures showing themselves. Now, in my mind, as well as many other enthusiasts and researchers, underwater mysteries remain to be solved. Now, the aquatic monster encounters and sightings detailed in this presentation offer a varied glimpse into the phenomenon. Before I go any further, I just want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking the subscribe and like button and by sharing our programming. If you're watching us on YouTube, Super Chat and Super Thanks donations are appreciated. And you can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. Other donation links are also shown in the description. So thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to again thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike. Also, want to thank Kevin and Mary at ESP. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps and we'll try to get to each one of them after the presentation. Now, this first account, a northwestern Ontario fisherman with his dog came face to face with a greenish brown humanoid. The dog was grabbed by this creature, sustaining an ear injury. Now, he tells me, this encounter is hard to explain. I was fishing in a river in northwestern Ontario, about a mile and a half from my grandmother's house. I had always walked there and fished from the bank where I had gone since I was a kid. I was down fishing with my dog named Queenie and was sitting and leaning against a tree. And when my bobber went down hard and my rod almost went out of my hands. I figured I had a bass or catfish. For some reason, though, I started following my line as if something was drawing me in. Queenie was freaking out, growling and even biting my leg, trying to get me to back up, but to keep following. I kept following it as if I were in trance. Then something broke the surface of the water in front of me, and all I could see was this torso and head of like a greenish brown head, and I saw its hands. Yes, a hand was pulling my line towards it, and I was so scared, but I couldn't stop as it brought me closer. Then Queenie was between us, barking and snapping at it, and I was able suddenly to go back towards the bank, leaving everything. I saw it grab Queenie, and grabbing at my knife, I cut the line, which I guess broke the trance. As I struggled out of the water, I saw Queenie and grabbed her and ran out of the water. I heard a weird slapping sound and a grunt and kept running until was almost home. I saw that Queenie was hurt. One of her ears was gone and bleeding, and I finally got to the house. I was crying and threw her into the car and straight to the vet, still wet and shaking. I told him something to get her and wait. I told him something to get her and wait anxiously until he came back and said she was lucky that he had extracted a tooth from her skull. He said it looked like an alligator tooth, but I knew better. I never told my family about what happened, but I know damn well it wasn't an alligator. So, in this next account, the witness states, as we got within 20 feet of the opposite shore, he described what felt like a pair of strong, hairy arms wrapped around both my legs and started to pull me under or pull him under. So he states in the account, in November 2019, I received a telephone call from a man in Fresno, California, who I will refer to as RA. He wanted to tell me about two incidents he and a friend had at Avocado Lake in Fresno County. Now, Avocado Lake Park is a 210-acre park, day use park, um, located 23 miles east of Fresno, California. Now, the lake has a strange history, specifically many mysterious drowning and Bigfoot activity. Stories have been told over the years surrounding these deaths and what lurks below. Many residents believe the lake to be haunted. RA had been visiting the lake since he was a child. His family had regularly gone there for recreation. Now, he and his friends also spent time at the location when he became an adult. RA knew about the strange occurrences, including the Bigfoot sightings. His family had experienced a Bigfoot sighting at Huron, only along the California aqueduct when he was younger, so he was well aware of the existence of these creatures. Now, the first incident at Avocado Lake occurred in 2014, which RA and his friend had been swimming. While they had been swimming, the friend was attempting to swim across the lake to the far bank. Now, as he got within 20 feet of the opposite shore, he described what he felt like a pair of strong, hairy arms wrapped around both of his legs and started to pull him under. He said that if there had been a long aquatic vegetation extending from the shore, of which he could grab hold, he would have certainly been pulled under the surface. RA told me that his friend was terrified and refused to get back into the water. Then in 2016, RA and his friend had a picnic at the park. Later in the afternoon, he and a lady friend walked down to the lake and sat alone on the shore. As they were talking, they both noticed a hairy hand and arm extend from the water near a large rock in the lake. They were about 50 feet away and both got an excellent view of a well defined human like hand and arm that was covered in dark, coarse hair. RA said that the arm was very long and extended well over 3 foot above the surface. Now, RA has shown some interest in investigating the lake and other areas. He has promised to keep in touch with me and to report any findings. Now, like I said before, the area is well known for Bigfoot sightings. And There have been some strange drownings at that lake as well. So I'm gonna talk about a few older accounts that were reported in some of the newspapers. Um, this came out of London. Sure, and the story states surely it would be had been a mistake for the silly season to pass without a sea serpent. Down at the Surrey docks just now is a man who has not only seen a fearful and wonderful marine monster, but has even sketched it from life. It is not exactly the sea serpent of hoary tradition, but a sort of sea giraffe, an extraordinary looking amphibious animal that is puzzling the zoologists who have heard of it and seen the drawing. Some idea of this weird freak of nature may be gathered from the first hand description of it. His bonny blue eyes, cries like a baby, neck 20 feet long, body 50 feet, big head with long ears and snout. Three horned fins adorn its bony head, two big flapping fins, skin like a seal and brownish yellow in color with pretty dark spots. Now, a plain and common sense seaman who tells his story bluntly without any frills or trimmings, Second Officer G. Batchelor of the Allen Line steamship Corinthian, describing his strange adventure with this sea giraffe. He said, "We were bound from London to Montreal. It was my turn on watch on the bridge in the early morning of August 30th. It was a cold morning, and the gray dawn was just breaking when, as I was keeping an eye straight ahead on our course, I picked up a queer looking object about a mile ahead. It disappeared, and as quickly as it shot up again, no more than 200 feet away from the ship. I saw it distinctly rise out of the water. First, there was a big head with long ears and a long snout and bulging blue eyes that were mild and liquid. Then there was a neck, no end of a neck, and it swayed with the wash of the waves. What it was, I couldn't guess, for in 20 years of seagoing, including trips into tropical waters, I've never seen anything like this sea giraffe that was staring right at the Corinthian. As the thing seemed to eye me, it lashed the water with its big front fins. Then it suddenly dived and disappeared, at the same time giving an odd little wail like a baby's cry. You wouldn't think such a huge animal has such a small voice. As soon as I went off duty, I went below and sketched the monster in India ink. When the Corinthian reached Montreal, my sketch was shown to Professor F.E. Lloyd of McGill University, an expert in zoology. The professor said that whatever it wasn't a serpent, but a sea mammal. It was certainly built on the high speed lines, and its fin like protuberance was well adapted for running things up. I located the sea giraffe in latitude 76 degrees, 51 minutes north, longitude 48 degrees, 32 minutes west off the Grand Banks, and not many mile distance from the spot where the Titanic went down. I am inclined to think that the wreck of the Titanic has been something to do with the presence of this strange creature in the waters where nothing of a kind has ever been noticed before. Is it making food from the dead bodies below? Mr. Batchelor made the gruesome suggestion in all seriousness. He was greatly impressed with the absolute accuracy of his observations. Mr. Batchelor, it may be added, is a canny Scot, and his view is that there may still be more survivors of an almost distinct race of sea beasts. Anyway, zoologists are not acquainted with an amphibious or aquatic reptile called a Saura pterygia, which curiously resembles the description of what Mr. Batcher saw. This sea monster had a small head and exceptionally long neck, but generally stated to have been extinct for ages. Now, this was printed in the Times Dispatch, Richmond, Virginia, on October 19th, 1913. So it wasn't that many months after the sinking of the RMS Titanic. Now, this Saura pterygia marine reptile is sometimes mentioned as a possible identification of the Loch Ness monster, though it's supposedly went extinct at the end of the Mesozoic period. On another note, I seriously doubt that any of the surviving family of the doomed ocean liner's passenger wanted to read about their loved ones being consumed by a sea giraffe. Now, this next account, the witness states, "Hi, Lon. I live in Iceland, and I thought that I would share my spooky story with you. We have a deep mythology of elves and supernatural beings here, but I'm always dismissed them as folklore until this trip to the Westfords. Now, the Westfords are a terrifyingly beautiful place with steep cliffs and long winding fjords. It's very remote and difficult to access in the oldest part of Iceland. Now, long story short, we were driving and taking advantage of the long daylight hours, a Sunday at 1 o'clock a.m. But the weather turned bad and we decided to sleep in the Jeep on a hill very close to the sea cliffs. Now, we all fell asleep quickly with the sound of the mighty waves crashing on the cliffs and the Jeep being hit with rain and sea spray. Now, here's where it gets weird. Now, my friend and I had very similar vivid dreams or nightmares that night. We both dreamt we were kidnapped by mermen, not little mermaids, but mermen, who are scary beings with big teeth and ugly faces. There are little details I remember, like one merman showing me a spine on its face and telling me that it was poisonous, like the same way a stingray's barbs are poisonous, and if you don't comply, it would sting us and we'd be dead in an instant. Now, they showed us this incredible technology and a projector that could show you your sins. Something told me that if the sin was too great, we wouldn't go back home. My greatest sins were played in front of everyone, and I felt like I passed some sort of test, and we were then shown this complex. It seemed like Atlantis, very futuristic. Also, I got the sense that we were deep underwater. Well, after this tour, we were brought back to the surface. My friend had a merman dream at the same time as mine, mainly remembering men walking out of the sea with different but similar details. We both agreed that it was very strange to have dreams of being kidnapped by aquatic people. Well, this could all just be crazy dreams. It's on the way back we stopped at the Sea Monster Museum, and they have an old depiction of a merman, and this eerily similar to what we dreamt about. We were both very unsettled by this. So, if you camp near the southern tip of Fluglundar, close to the haunted caves from Gisla Saga, there is a chance you might meet an actual merman or mermaid. But watch out. They are not babes. They are instead fish people who will eat you if you're a bad person on the inside. Now, this following article is an encounter with a massive aquatic creature that was published in Norwich Bulletin in Norwich, Connecticut in August 27th, 1909. The sea serpent of the Atlantic coast resorts will have to take a back seat for a queer amphibious creature that is reported in the Walnut River here by W.H. Kinney and H.G. Case, who were fishing near the mouth of Black Creek on Wednesday. Kinney bears evidence of conflict of some kind. His wrist was gashed, as was a saw. The wound, he says, was inflicted by a river monster that made it a desperate effort to get into the boat occupied by himself and his companion. The two men were fishing for bass and channel catfish when they saw the monster jump out of the water after a fish that Case had pulled up. The first sight of the creature led the men to believe that this was a huge eel, but its second appearance was more terrifying. The thing dashed close to the boat after one of the captured fish. It had a long horn on its snout and measured about 6 feet in length. Its general facial appearance was like that of a catfish, except for the sharp horn. It was the horn that cut Kinney. The strange visitor managed to crawl under the bow of the boat before the occupants could recover from their amazement. It impaled a bass that was lying at the bottom of the boat and then went overboard again. As the creature slid back into the water, it slapped its tail, which seemed to have a sponge like quality, so fiercely that the air was filled with fine spray that blinded and drenched the fishermen. So, in this next account, a California woman and her cousin observed several mermaids near Santa Monica Pier. The witness remarked that the aquatic humanoids seemed evil and that they glowed. Hello, I recently read a few of your posts that involve sightings and encounters with mermaids. Now, me and my cousin saw 20 or more of them on the side of Santa Monica Pier a few years back. I know that sounds incredible, but it happened. At first, it was just one. It was on the beach. We originally thought it was a dog, but then when the waves came in and the being jumped in the water, more of them showed themselves but kept the distance. They also stayed out of the moonlight, I think to avoid pictures or to be seen even more. They were also lined up like soldiers. I'm pretty sure they were admiring the lights on the pier. Now, the truth that the ones I saw looked kind of evil, had straight back posture, and even glowed a little. They looked kind of bluish, but not sure what color they were. The glow was a yellow green luminescent. It wasn't a very bright glow, it was very dim, but maybe it could have been the pier lights reflecting off of them. I'm not sure. Now, remarkably enough, this is not the first time I've received reports of mermaids and aquatic humanoids being seen around the Santa Monica Bridge or the pier and the beach. Another witness swore that while diving, he was attacked and incapacitated by a female underwater humanoid. And I think I read that the last time I talked about aquatic humanoids. So, this next account, a U.S. Navy submariner recalls an encounter with a massive creature that scraped across the hull of the ship while off the coast of Hawaii. Was it a Kraken? So he tells me, I was in the U.S. Navy on submarines, and I had a buddy in the barracks who was a sonar tech on another sub. They listen for things in the water all day, and that's their only job, when they're on watch at least. Anyway, one day they were in local waters off the coast of Hawaii by a few hundred miles doing training or whatever, when suddenly the whole boat heard something large and make noise against the hull. It made a zipper popping noise from the front of the boat to the back. There was supposed to be nothing in the area. No sonar buoys from the training aircraft, no floating rope or buoy that had a chain or anything else would give a logical explanation for the noise. They surfaced the ship to check for damage and noticed a few of the sound dampening tiles. They're kind of like rubbery or foam that covered the boat that also had been ripped off previously. It hadn't been ripped off previously. It was unclear whether the thing that caused noise was what removed them, since they sometimes just fell off anyway. But my buddy was pretty darn sure it was the suckers of a giant squid or some other monster mollusk that made the noise. I guess to him it sounded suction cup like. He was also almost certain it was biological noise, not mechanical. The only problem is that giant squid only get to be about 30 feet long. Whatever made this noise was appreciably bigger. So anyway, he tells me everyone in the boat was fondled by a kraken, and I guess I believe him. Now, this next account, a young man who lives next to the Delaware River starts to notice strange prints in his yard. One night, he and his girlfriend observed two 3-foot tall fish like humanoids walking in the yard. So he tells me, I live in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania, in Delaware County. I went to college in Philadelphia. My parents moved to Florida a few months ago, but they kept their house here. So I'm living in it right now. The property is along the bank of the Delaware River. The river is 20 or so yards from the back door of the house. I had found a new job and I stayed up later and later. I was bored and with no one else to hang out with. Most nights I would wind up outside in a lawn chair fishing in the river until 3 in the morning. It was on a night like this when the first incident occurred. Now, I wasn't paying too much attention to the people around me. I was watching something on my phone and my rod started bouncing like crazy. I jumped up to set the hook, jerking it back. The line went slack for a second, then jerked away. I figured I had a fish on, but when I tried to reel again, it wouldn't budge. I thought maybe I was snagged, but then the line snapped away again. Now, I'm not an expert fisherman, but the way the line moved was odd, not like a typical fish bite, but like something in the water was purposely pulling back on the line each time I did. It was almost like it was intelligent. I was a bit freaked out and I ended up just cutting the line and heading back inside. I told myself it was caught on a snag or something, but I suspected otherwise. So a week later, I had fallen asleep in my chair, and I woke up startled after hearing a large splash in the water just a few yards out. Now the light from my back porch barely hit the edge of the water, and I could see a series of rings spreading out from where something had entered the water. A new set of rings then appeared a few feet away, and then again and again until they were out of sight. I was a bit baffled since catfish or bottom feeders seldom come to the surface of the water and they rarely jump. I grabbed my gear and headed inside, but in my groggy state, I left my cutting board knife and a fresh bag of bait. I used pepperoni for catfish, and they were sitting on the ground outside. The next day, I had realized what I had done and went outside to retrieve it. Everything was gone. In the patch of dirt near where I had left the stuff, I could see faint prints. Some kind of thin footed animal with only two long, slender toes had been walking through the area. I also found silvery fish scales that were spread sporadically around, and both prints in the scales led straight back to the water's edge. I must admit that at this point I was a little bugged out. I didn't know what to make of the evidence, but I figured that any kind of call to the police was going to make them laugh. So I tried to find information on the prints online, but with no luck. I decided that I would give fishing a rest for a while. I needed to get better sleep anyway. I was starting to get tired halfway through the day at work. So 2 weeks went by, and I hadn't been back outside to fish. I had started dating a new girl. Between her and work, I pretty much forgot all about the tracks, but then the most bizarre incident occurred. I was fast asleep in the room upstairs when I was shaken awake by my girlfriend. She told me that my dog was downstairs barking like crazy. Now, I'm a heavy sleeper and probably wouldn't have noticed, but sure enough, he was downstairs going nuts. Before I reached the stairs, the barking abruptly stopped, but then it turned into a low growl. I felt a twinge of panic. My girlfriend was behind me on the stairs and we crept down quietly. I could see the dog standing at the back door in a rigid posture, growling at something outside. I walked quietly over to him and started to calm him down. I was stroking his head, and when I heard my girlfriend let out a gasp, she was looking through the small window of the back door. I stood up to look for myself. Unmistakably, there were two bipedal creatures, no more than 3 foot tall, walking around my backyard. It was dark and then the lights were off, but I could make out a pallid silver color to them. They had no eyes that I could see, but something like a fin was running down the spine of each creature. We stood frozen for a few moments watching these two creatures. At one point, they ambled over to each other. I swear that they were making hand gestures toward the house. My girlfriend saw this too and whispered that she was going to call the cops. She ran upstairs to grab her phone while I stayed and watched for a few more minutes. My dog started barking again, and this time both creatures just walked away towards the river and disappeared under the water. The police arrived about 20 minutes later and looked around. Now, they didn't see any signs of the creatures, but said that they had found some wet prints outside. They were the same ones that I had seen on the ground a few weeks ago. Since no crime was committed, they didn't seem too interested, but the officers took my report and told me to call again if anything else happens. So, this was a month ago. I've looked online for any kind of information on these creatures, but can't find anything. I haven't gotten a good night's sleep since, and my girlfriend has refused to come back to the house. Do you have any idea what these creatures may have been? So I got back to the witness and I asked for more details. There wasn't much more information he could provide. He did state that he had contacted other investigators who ignored his inquiry. I will admit that this is the first time I've heard of or read of anything similar being seen in that area, let alone the region. Uh, if anybody has any information, feel free to contact me. Now, this next account, an American teen girl, her father and her brother traveled to Thailand. They were snorkeling near some islands when she observed what she believed was a mermaid or merman. She tells me, I'm so glad that I found your blog. This is something that's been bothering me for years. I'm a 22-year-old American woman, and when I was 13, my dad, my younger brother, and I went to Thailand. We traveled to Phi Island by boat with one of those travel companies for tourists and stopped by several islands to snorkel. One of these stops, my brother and I were right next to each other, looking at a fish that I found cute. To paint the picture a bit better, at this moment, my brother and I were snorkeling in the water right by a floating island, while the others in our group were a bit further away from this island. This island was like a chunk of land that extended downward into the water rather than having a gradual slope. Now, suddenly, our dad called out to us. Someone in our group saw a small shark, and everyone gathered around to see it. My brother swam over there, but for some reason, I stayed put and kept watching the different fish that were swimming so close to me. Then something caught my attention. There were smaller caves underneath by the shore, and I saw something slowly coming out of there. It was like a human head facing down towards the bottom of the ocean. I completely froze up and kept staring. The person kind of floated out of the cave, never faced up toward the surface, and did it very slowly. Nothing of this person that I could see was moving. By this point, I could see the back of the head and almost most of the back. The person had sparse black hair and slicked down to the scalp. Their skin looked gray and the spine was extremely pronounced. I was so sure that I was looking at a corpse that I completely froze up. I couldn't breathe or move. Time felt like it was standing still. The person kept floating out of the cave, and that's when I started seeing its tail. The tail was dark gray and looked like a stereotypical mermaid tail. I blinked multiple times, convinced I was hallucinating, but I kept seeing it. I never believed in the supernatural, but this thing was only a few meters below me, and I could see it so clearly. I felt a sense of danger. I knew that I wasn't supposed to be seeing this, and I was terrified that it would see me and attack me. But the thing never once faced up. Once it was out, it swayed to the side, kept a close distance to the island, and disappeared into another cave. Now, after a few seconds, I snapped out of it and I quickly swam to my dad and brother. I burst into tears and frankly told them what we had to get back to the boat right away. My dad asked me what happened, and I told him what I saw. He didn't believe me and got furious at me for lying. When we got back to the boat, I told him again and stood by the fact that I wasn't lying. My father told me that he hoped that it was either a lie or that I was insane and I had to be locked up in a mental institution. I knew how crazy all of it sounded, and honestly, I didn't even believe it myself. I decided to tell him that I made it up later on. Now, since that day, I've tried to convince myself that I made it all up, but I've never experienced any hallucinations and I know what I saw. I told others, but of course, most of them thought I made it up. It's so insanely frustrating feeling like you've been gaslit by the entire world. And I truly hope that something out there or someone out there believes me. So this next account's the last one. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and start putting them up. The witness tells me we bought a little house down by the Loveland Castle Museum back in 2000. It was perched upon a ravine in a creek, and the back of the house dropped off very steeply. There would have been enough room for a man or a bipedal person to stand behind the house, but the basement window were eye level, and the first floor was quite far up from the place where one could stand. The reason I point this out is that because it is a very small house, we had to use the basement for our two boys' bedrooms. Now, they kept complaining that something kept looking in the window at them, and my husband and I laughed it off at first. It was a wooded setting, very rural and beautiful, and very dark at night, having no street lights out there. So it seemed funny that they were thinking something was watching them. We had just told them maybe it was a deer. They were plentiful in the fall and went about our business. So one night, however, I woke up hearing a weird sound like just outside our bedroom window on the first floor. It faced out back of the house, and I was puzzled as to it could be because it sounded like a man breathing heavily. I started to sit up and realized that whatever it was looking at my window just inches from my head, and I was terrified. I did not look out because I knew that I would see it, and kept feeling something urging me to look. Now, we often hear squeaky noises, screeching, not like an owl, and a crying baby. I woke my husband up, and he said whatever it would have had to have been 10 foot tall to look in our window. I couldn't sleep that night, but whatever had been out there had moved on. Now, I didn't mention to the kids the next day. The boys came up from the basement shaken from seeing the red glowing eyes the night before. They were every bit as big as red road reflectors, and they heard heavy breathing, and the hair on their bodies stood up on end. This was only one experience we had out there in Loveland. It's right down by the Little Miami River, only a stone's throw. Many weird things out there. Green glows, orbs, something very large and black on top of the roof of the house very late at night. When the light was shining on it, did not go through whatever it was on the roof. It just looked like a huge dark figure. I'd like to know if you had any weird stories about this area. We moved a few miles away, but still go past there very often. So, as many of you can probably guess, I assume that this witness, whose name was Crystal, was not aware of the Loveland Frogman sightings. Now, those who don't know about the story, the first sighting was in May of 1955, around 3:30 a.m. An unnamed businessman claimed that he witnessed three bipedal quasi-reptilian entities congregated by the side of the road. Later, March 3rd, 1972, around 1 a.m., an anonymous police officer was traveling along Riverside Road heading toward Loveland when he came across a frog-like creature on the side of the road. Now, a few weeks later, March 17th, 1972, Officer Mark Matthews reported pulling over to assist an injured animal on the side of the road. Now, upon approaching the creature, Officer Matthews was startled by a strange frog man like creature. Now, the story of the Loveland Frogman begins on a barren stretch of road that runs along the Miami River in Claremont County, just on the outskirts of the small town of Loveland, Ohio. And this would probably be the approximate area where Crystal had lived. Around 3:30 a.m. in May of 1955, an unnamed businessman claimed to witness these three bipedal quasi-reptilian creatures gathered on the side of the road. The businessman pulled over the curb and observed the creature for what he estimated to be about 3 minutes. He went on to describe the creatures as being 3 to 4 foot tall, covered in leathery skin, and having webbed hands and feet. Perhaps the most distinguishing characteristic of these creatures, however, is their distinctly frog like heads, which the businessman reported to have deep wrinkles where their hair would have been. As the anonymous businessman watched the three frogmen, one of the creatures suddenly held up what the witness described as some kind of wand above its head. He further claimed that sparks spewed out of the top of the wand. Upon witnessing the strange sight, the businessman fled the scene, fearing for his life. So the next documented encounter with the Loveland frogman occurred at approximately 1 a.m. on March 3rd, 1972, when a police officer who chose to remain anonymous was traveling down Riverside Road heading towards Loveland. The officer claimed that he was driving slowly due to the over-iced roads when he suddenly saw what appeared to be a dog on the side of the road. The creature darted out in front of the cruiser, causing the officer to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting the unknown animal. And when the cruiser came to a stop, the headlines fell upon a crouched frog-like creature. Quickly, the creature stood on two legs and stared back at the officer, its eyes illuminated by high beams, and scrambled over the guardrail, down the embankment, and finally vanished into the Ohio River. The officer described the creature as being 3 to 4 foot tall and weighing around 50 to 75 pounds. He also stated that the skin had a leathery texture and that the animal resembled that of a frog or lizard. Now, later that evening, another officer returned to the scene but found no signs of the animal, but did report that there were distinctive scratch marks on the guardrail that the creature reportedly had scrambled over. So later, another sighting by a police officer, Mark Matthews, had an encounter of his own 2 weeks later. According to Officer Matthews' report, he spotted what he believed to be an injured animal on the pavement while driving into Loveland. Matthews stepped out of his cruiser to remove the injured animal from the ice-slicked road. As Officer Matthews got closer to the body of the creature lurching upwards into a crouched position, startled by the strange creature's frog-like appearance, Matthews drew his gun and fired at the creature, wounding the wounded frogman limped to the side of the road and slid over the guardrail. Officer Matthews' description of the frog-like creature matched that of the other officers sighting 2 weeks prior. Now, years after his original sighting, Officer Matthews had somewhat changed his story. He now claims that the creature he saw that night was nothing more than a large reptile that escaped from its owner. He further insisted that the reason he shot the creature was to help confirm the fellow officer's story. Did Matthew change his story due to the ridicule or the fading memory of an event that took place one night on an icy road outside of Loveland? In the many years following the strange string of sightings, there had been no reported sightings of strange creatures what had become since known as the Loveland Frogmen. Now I wonder if the phenomenon started again, considering Crystal's reports and the new information I received later. And I have received other sightings of this creature since that time myself. I don't know how many other reports have been made, but I have made a couple of reports on the blog in the past 20 or so years. Now, I don't know if the descriptions are very similar to what these people have seen, but there's definitely something out there. So, folks, go ahead and put up your questions, and Kevin and I will look it over and see what we can answer. Hans Quatch, depths of the ocean unexplored. How much history do you think is buried underwater, and do you think aliens have always been there, living there? Well, I tell you, I've received and investigated a lot of abduction reports and encounter reports that suggest that individual may have been taken to an underwater facility. David Eckhart said the same thing to me. he was sure that he was taken to an underwater facility off Pensacola. Um, for years, there have been rumors of an underwater facility off the coast of Puerto Rico. So I don't know. It could very well be, but do I believe there's something underneath the oceans that could be alien based? Absolutely. Like I had mentioned before, very really in the overall scheme of things, very little of the ocean has been mapped out and even explored. Nancy Malcolm, oh, Marla Snyder, do you think underwater alien bases have anything to do with the underwater cryptids? Maybe. It could. I mean, I guess. Um, could these underwater humanoids be actual aliens or living in underground cities or underground areas that I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I really don't know. I've heard enough reports and read enough reports over the years to believe there's something out there. So, your guess is as good as mine. Dagnabbit, what do you think of the phenomenon of large black clouds or green lightning that stops electrical devices as it passes over you? I have heard that maybe once or twice. I don't know. I mean, it sounds very similar to when people report unknown craft going over and doing the same thing. Is it actually a craft or is it cloud or what? I don't know. Jose Sanchez, you always hear about mermaids, but when did the man-maids or mermen burst into the paranormal scene? I've seen an episode from Paranormal Caught on Camera TV show. I found it very bizarre. You know, um, I have received a lot of merman accounts coming out of landlocked lakes, particularly the Caspian Sea, and some coming out of the Black Sea. There have been reports by fishermen in both those locations out of Iran and out of Turkey for many years, as well as Ukraine. Now, and I did mention about a Ukrainian woman having an encounter with one of these beings years ago in Crimea. Um, I believe there's something going on, and of course with the merman, you don't hear many merman accounts in this part of the world. I mean, coming out of the Caribbean, it's always females that are part of the lore. What the sailors said they saw were all females, and but I don't know. But I have received merman accounts over the years. Marla Snyder, do you get many reports of sightings in and around the Delaware River? Very few. Yeah, that's one of the few I've gotten. And, you think out of, the Delaware Bay that run, that where the Delaware River empties into is pretty large bay. I mean, it's just deep, it's not deeper than most parts of the Chesapeake, but you don't hear a whole lot coming out of there. Jose Sanchez, of the scarce reports of frogman and lizard people, might you have similarity as far as skin type is concerned? Um, most times, uh, the descriptions are of skin that is very seal-like or amphibian-like, no scales. Even the ones that look reptilian very rarely have scales if they're seen coming in and out of the water, as opposed to regular reptiles. So I don't know. Are they even reptiles? That maybe they're all amphibian. I really don't know. Anything else? See, Okay, Sir Wolf has one question up here. They say there are large bodies of water beneath the seabed and land. Who knows what's there? That's true. We have no idea. We have no idea. And it's just like when you talk about Lake Champlain, uh, people have talked about aquifers actually reaching out into the St. Lawrence Seaway that run underneath there. Maybe these creatures are coming from the ocean. I know Loch Ness has the Ness River that goes through by Inverness and out into the ocean. But there have been several people who believe that they've seen something navigating the river into Loch Ness. So I don't know. I know there's some large salmon runs that go through there, but as far as a creature the size of what's purported to be seen at Loch Ness, I don't know. Anything else, folks? Jose Sanchez, have you seen cases of specter women that appear out of nowhere in small rivers, especially when there are people swimming about? Yeah, the sprites in particular. A lot of times you get those reports out of Africa, freshwater streams in Africa. There have been several that I've heard of over the years, but I can't think of any other place that has really had sprite sightings or water sprite sightings other than there. Okay, folks. Well, thanks all you for watching and chatting. And if you donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support is what makes all this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. Now, if you have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the Families of Monsters blog or the personal report show, just email me at lonstricklerfamiliesofmonsters.com. So until we meet again next Friday, stay healthy and safe. Have a great weekend.